Tonight, we ask the question the world was never ready for. What if the young wolf found something in the snow that was not a direwolf? What if, beyond the wall, in the frozen country where the maps ended and the legends began, there was something older than the Starks, and older than the Targaryens, and older than the wall itself? Something that had been sleeping in the ice for 1,000 years, and that woke for a boy with wolf blood and winter in his bones. Robb Stark found a dragon. Not a Targaryen's dragon, not a tame beast bred in dragon pits and chained to silver-haired princes. A wild dragon. An ancient thing, scarred and vast and burning with a fire that had survived the centuries by staying hidden in the one place no sane man looked. The frozen north, beyond the wall, in the country where dragons were supposed to be impossible. Robb found it, and Robb nearly died finding it, and Robb earned its trust, the only way trust can be earned from a creature older than your bloodline. By being patient, by being brave, and by refusing to treat it like a weapon. He rode the dragon to war. He burned the Lannister army. He won every battle he fought, and he lost every friend he had. Because a man on a dragon is a god, and nobody follows gods. They kneel to them. This is the story of the king who flew, and the kingdom that could not follow him into the sky, and the dragon that chose a wolf and then chose the wind, and the wolf who learned that the greatest power is not fire, but the wisdom to let the fire go. Beyond the wall. The first report. The reports came from the Night's Watch, and the reports did not make sense. 3 wildling villages north of the Frostfangs had been destroyed. Not raided, destroyed. The structures burned, the livestock gone, the people gone. Not dead in the ruins, not scattered into the wilderness, gone. As if the villages had been emptied by something that did not leave bodies, because the thing that emptied them consumed everything it took. The Watch sent rangers. The rangers found the ruins, blackened earth, melted snow, the stone foundations cracked by heat that had no business existing in the coldest part of the world. The rangers found tracks, enormous tracks, clawed, deeper than a mammoth's but wider, and with a spacing that suggested something that walked on 4 legs, and that was larger than anything the rangers had encountered. The rangers found scorch marks. Not the scorch marks of a campfire or a lightning strike. The scorch marks of sustained heat, lines of blackened earth that ran for hundreds of yards across the snow. The kind of burning that happened when something dragged fire across the ground the way a plough dragged iron across a field. Benjen Stark brought the report to Winterfell. He brought it personally, riding south from Castle Black with the urgency of a man who had read the Ranger's account and who had not believed it, and who had ridden to the ruins himself, and who had stood in the blackened snow and looked at the scorch marks, and who had believed. Something is killing wildlings north of the Frostfangs, Benjen said, in Ned's solar. Ned and Robb and Benjen, the 3 Starks, the morning light coming through the windows of Winterfell. Wildlings kill each other, Ned said. Not like this. The villages aren't raided, they're erased. The burning is... Benjen held the pause. The burning is not natural, Ned. I've seen forest fires, I've seen lightning strikes, I've seen every kind of fire the North produces. This is different. The heat cracked stone. Stone. Ned. Whatever did this was hotter than anything that burns naturally. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting. I'm reporting. 3 villages destroyed by something that burns hotter than natural fire, leaves tracks larger than a mammoth's, and takes the people. The Watch doesn't have the men to investigate properly. We're undermanned. We've been undermanned for years. And you want northern support. I want someone to take this seriously. Robb listened. He listened the way he had been listening to the Watch's reports for months, with the focused attention of a young lord's son who had been training himself to see patterns in the information that flowed through Winterfell. The reports from the wall were usually routine: wildling movements, weather, supply requests. This was not routine. "I'll go," Robb said. Ned and Benjen looked at him. "I'll take a party north," Robb said. 10 men. Scouts, not soldiers. We investigate the villages, track whatever is doing this, and report back." "You're 17, Ned said. "I'm the heir to Winterfell. The Watch needs support. The support should come from a Stark. You can't leave. You're the Lord. Benjen needs to be at Castle Black. I can go. Beyond the wall." Beyond the wall. Ned held the silence. The father's assessment, the weighing of risk against duty, the calculation that every lord made when sending men into danger, and that every father remade when the man being sent was his son. 10 men, Ned said. Experienced rangers. Benjen chooses them. Benjen chooses them. You track. You observe. You do not engage. Whatever is out there, you find it. You report. You come home. I understand. Robb. Ned held his son's eyes. You come home. I'll come home. He did not know, when he said it, that coming home would take longer than expected, and that when he did come home, he would not come alone. The ruins. What Robb found. The journey beyond the wall took 4 days. 4 days of climbing through the Frostfangs, the jagged mountain range that ran along the western edge of the North's true wilderness, the peaks that were the boundary between the world of men and the world of ice. Robb rode with Greywind and 10 rangers, chosen by Benjen, hard men, cold-proven, the kind of northerners who had spent years beyond the wall, and who had the particular flatness of expression that came from seeing things in the far north that you did not discuss at supper. They found the first village on the morning of the 5th day. The village was gone. Not abandoned, erased. The structures that had been wooden were ash. The structures that had been stone were cracked, the stone split by heat that had been intense enough to expand the rock beyond its capacity. The snow around the village had been melted in a circle 300 yards across, melted and refrozen, producing a disk of ice that was smooth and flat and eerily perfect. Greywind would not enter the disk. The direwolf stopped at the edge of the melted zone and growled, the low, sustained growl that was Greywind's warning, the sound the wolf made when something was wrong, in a way that went past danger into something older and deeper. Greywind's hackles rose. Greywind's amber eyes tracked something in the ruins that Robb could not see. "The wolf knows," one of the rangers said. A man named Garrett, who had been beyond the wall for 12 years, and who had the vocabulary of a man who had run out of words for the things he had seen. "Animals know." "Know what?" "Something that doesn't belong here. Something that the—" Garrett looked at the ruins. "Something that the world forgot about, and that came back." Robb dismounted. He entered the disk, the melted zone, the circle of ice. The surface was slippery, and the air smelled wrong. Not the clean cold of the north, but something metallic, something heated. The smell of superheated stone that lingered even after the heat was gone. He walked through the ruins. He found the tracks. The tracks were enormous. 3-clawed, each claw wider than Robb's spread hand. The footprints pressed deep into the refrozen ice. The spacing between the prints suggested a creature that was 20 feet from shoulder to hip, that walked on 4 legs, and that dragged something behind it, a tail, long enough to leave its own furrow in the ice. The scorch marks were worse up close. They were not random. They were directional. Lines of burning that started at a point. A mouth, Robb thought, a mouth that breathed fire, and swept across the village in arcs. The arcs overlapping. The coverage systematic. Whatever had burned this village had not burned it in rage or by accident. It had burned it methodically, the way a man cleared a field. "These aren't random attacks," Robb said to the rangers. "This is territorial. Something is clearing ground." Clearing ground for what? I don't know. They followed the tracks. The tracks led north and west, deeper into the Frostfangs, into the high country where the peaks were too steep for trees, and the snow was permanent, and the air was thin enough that breathing required effort. The tracks climbed. Whatever had made them was not hindered by the terrain. The prints were evenly spaced, unhurried, the gait of a creature that was not running from anything, and not running toward anything, but simply moving through its territory, with the confidence of a thing that had no predators. They followed the tracks for 2 days. On the 7th day, beyond the wall, Robb Stark found the dragon. The dragon, what Robb saw. It was in a valley. A caldera, really. The remains of a volcano that had erupted 10,000 years ago and that had left, in the Frostfang's high country, a bowl of black stone surrounded by peaks of ice. The caldera was warm, impossibly warm. The heat rising from vents in the black stone, the same volcanic heat that fed Winterfell's hot springs 800 miles to the south. The dragon was lying in the center of the caldera, on a bed of heated stone, and it was the largest living thing Robb had ever seen. Not the largest thing he could imagine. Not the dragons of legend. Not Balerion the Blackdread, whose shadow could cover a city, whose fire had melted Harrenhal. This was smaller than legend, but it was real. And real was worse than legend, because legend was a story, and real was a creature that was breathing in front of him with the slow rhythm of something ancient. Each breath a bellows pulse that moved the air in the caldera and sent heat shimmering across the black stone. The dragon was dark. Not black, dark. The color of deep water or old bronze, a color that shifted in the volcanic light between green and brown, and the nameless shade that metal became when it had been heated and cooled 1,000 times. The scales were enormous, each one the size of a shield, overlapping, scarred. The scars were the first thing Robb noticed after the size. The dragon was covered in scars. Old wounds, healed badly. The marks of a life spent fighting. Other dragons, perhaps, in the age when dragons were common. Or the ice itself. The centuries of survival in the frozen north. The wings were folded against the body. Even folded, they were vast. The wingspan would be, Robb estimated, 80 feet or more. The membranous leather between the wing bones, dark and thick and bearing its own scars. The head was as long as a horse. The eyes were open. The eyes were watching Robb. The eyes were gold. Not amber, gold. The true gold of Lannister coins and summer wheat. But alive. The gold shifting and burning with an internal light that was not reflected but generated. The light of a mind that was behind the eyes and that was assessing the small creature that had walked into its home. Robb stopped. He stopped because the eyes stopped him. Not through fear, though the fear was there. A physical thing that lived in his legs and his stomach and his chest. The eyes stopped him because they were intelligent. Not the intelligence of an animal. The intelligence of a creature that was older than the wall, and that had watched the world change from a caldera in the mountains, and that was now watching a 17-year-old boy stand in its territory and try very hard not to run. Grey Wind was gone. The direwolf had refused to enter the caldera, had stopped at the rim and howled, and would not come further. The wolf's instinct recognizing the presence of something that was beyond the wolf's capacity to challenge. The rangers were behind Robb. He could hear them, the breathing, the whispered curses, the sounds of men who had spent years beyond the wall, and who had never seen anything like this, and who were, he could tell without looking, reaching for weapons that would be useless against a creature covered in scales thicker than castle walls. "Nobody move," Robb said. "We should," Garrett began. "Nobody move." Robb stood in the caldera and looked at the dragon, And the dragon looked at Robb, and the looking was the beginning of everything. The dragon did not attack. This was the thing that Robb would later identify as the first sign. The not attacking. The dragon was a predator. The dragon had destroyed 3 villages. The dragon was capable of killing every person in the caldera with a single breath. And the dragon did not attack. It watched. It watched Robb with the gold eyes that were assessing, measuring, calculating, the intelligence behind the gaze doing the thing that intelligence always did, evaluating whether the new thing was a threat, a meal, or something else. Robb made a decision. He made it with the same instinct that would, in other timelines, produce the strategies that won battles and the decisions that made kings. The instinct was not thought. It was the thing before thought, the animal-level recognition of what the moment required. He sat down, on the black stone, in the caldera, 30 feet from the largest predator in the world. He sat down and put his hands on his knees, and he did not reach for his sword, and he did not back away, and he did not run. He sat. The dragon watched him sit. The gold eyes changed. Not dramatically, a shift, the reptilian equivalent of a raised eyebrow, the recognition that the small creature had done something unexpected. The small creature was not running. The small creature was not attacking. The small creature was sitting. The dragon had not encountered sitting in a very long time. Robb sat in the caldera for 3 hours. He sat until his legs were numb and his back ached, and the rangers behind him were certain he had gone mad. He sat because the sitting was the only thing he could do that was not threatening. The only response to a creature of overwhelming power that said, "I am not here to fight you. I am not here to claim you. I am here." At the end of the 3 hours, the dragon closed its eyes. Not in sleep, in acceptance. The closing was the first concession, the first sign that the dragon had assessed the small sitting creature and decided that the creature was not a threat and not a meal, but something else. Something the dragon had not encountered in centuries. A man who was not afraid enough to run and not stupid enough to fight. Robb stood. His legs barely held him. He walked backward out of the caldera, not turning his back, not breaking the visual connection. And he reached the rim where Grey Wind was waiting, and the wolf pressed against his leg, and the pressing was the wolf's assessment. "You are insane. You are alive." Both are true. "We camp here tonight," Robb said to the rangers. "Here, next to the here." They camped. Robb went back to the caldera the next morning, and the next, and the next. The bonding. What trust looked like. The bonding took 6 weeks. 6 weeks in the caldera, in the Frostfangs, beyond the wall, with 10 increasingly anxious rangers and a direwolf that would not stop growling, and a dragon that was slowly, incrementally, over the course of 42 days, deciding whether the boy who sat in its territory was worth acknowledging. The process was not dramatic. It was not the Targaryen claiming, the moment of conquest, the Dragon Lord mounting the beast and commanding it through blood magic and Valyrian authority. Robb had no Valyrian blood. He had no blood magic. He had no authority over a creature that was older than his civilization. What he had was patience. He sat in the caldera every day for 4 to 6 hours. He brought food, deer, hunted by the rangers, carried into the caldera and left on the stone between Robb and the dragon. The dragon did not eat the offerings immediately. It watched Robb bring them. It watched Robb leave them. It waited until Robb retreated to the caldera's edge before approaching the food. The approach cautious, the ancient predator treating the small sitting creature with the wariness that centuries of survival had bred into its behavior. In the 9th day, the dragon nearly killed him. Not intentionally. The dragon was not trying to kill Robb. The dragon was dreaming. The enormous creature was asleep on the heated stone, the bellows breathing slow and deep, the gold eyes closed, the ancient mind processing whatever 1,000-year-old predator processed in its sleep. And in the dreaming, the dragon moved, the tail, the 60-foot armored appendage that was powerful enough to demolish a stone wall, swinging across the caldera floor with the uncontrolled force of a creature that was not aware of its own movement. The tail swept through the space where Robb was sitting. Robb saw it coming, the peripheral vision, the movement in the corner of his eye, the massive shape swinging toward him with the casual speed of something that did not know it was about to crush a human being. He threw himself sideways. Not gracefully, desperately, the scrambling dive of a man whose body was reacting faster than his mind, the instinct that said move before the thinking caught up. The tail passed through the space where Robb had been sitting. The air displaced by the swing hit him like a fist, the force of the passage, the wind of something enormous moving through the space that his body had occupied a heartbeat before. The tail hit the caldera wall. Stone shattered. The impact sent fragments flying, rock chips, the debris of volcanic stone breaking under a force that was not malicious, but that was absolute. The difference between intention and capacity. The gap between what the dragon meant to do and what the dragon was capable of doing. Robb lay on the caldera floor and breathed. The dragon woke. The gold eyes opened. The ancient creature looked at the small creature lying on the ground beside it, and the intelligence behind the eyes processed what had happened. The tail. The swing. The near miss that was the inevitable consequence of a 1,000-year-old predator sharing sleeping quarters with a creature the size of its smallest claw. The dragon exhaled. A long breath. Not fire, air, the warm exhalation that was the dragon's version of an apology. I did not mean to. The words were not there, but the meaning was, carried through the bond. Through the channel that was growing stronger every day. The impression of regret that was not human regret, but that served the same purpose. Robb stood. His left shoulder was bleeding. A rock fragment had cut through his clothing and into the skin, the wound shallow but painful. The reminder that the caldera was not a stable, and the dragon was not a horse, and the bonding was not a negotiation between equals, but a negotiation between a human and a force of nature that could kill the human by accident while sleeping. "It's all right," Robb said. To the dragon. To himself. The dragon watched him tend the wound, the gold eyes tracking his hands, the intelligence processing the blood, the small creature's damage. The watching was protective, not the protection of a guardian, but the attention of a creature that had decided the small thing was worth watching, and that watching included the awareness of the small thing's fragility. From that day, the dragon did not sleep while Robb was in the caldera. The dragon rested, the eyes half closed, the breathing slow. But the sleeping, the deep sleep that produced the unconscious movements, that the dragon saved for the hours when Robb was not present. The accommodation was the dragon's, not Robb's. The accommodation was trust. In the second week, the dragon began to eat while Robb was still near. This was progress. Not trust, tolerance. The distinction mattered, because trust implied a relationship, and tolerance implied merely the absence of hostility. And the absence of hostility was a long way from the presence of partnership. Robb did not push. He had the instinct, the same instinct that made him a natural leader of men, that told him pushing was the thing that would destroy whatever was forming. The dragon was wild. The dragon had been wild for 1,000 years. The dragon's wildness was not a condition to be cured, but a quality to be respected. And the respect was the thing Robb could offer that no Targaryen dragonlord had ever offered. The acknowledgement that the creature's will was its own. In the third week, the dragon let Robb approach within 10 feet. In the fourth week, the dragon turned its head to track Robb's movement, not the tracking of a predator following prey, but the tracking of a creature following an interest, the way a person turned to watch something they had decided was worth watching. In the fifth week, Robb touched the dragon. He extended his hand, his bare hand, ungloved, the skin exposed to the cold air and the dragon's proximity heat, and he reached across the last few feet of distance, and he put his palm against the dragon's neck. The scale was warm, not hot, warm, the steady internal heat of a creature whose blood burned hotter than mammalian blood. The warmth that was the dragon's signature, and that Robb felt through his palm, and into his arm, and into his chest. The heat traveling through him, as if the touching had opened a channel. The dragon did not move. The gold eyes were open, watching, the intelligence behind them processing the touch, the first human contact in centuries, the small warm hand on the vast dark neck, the sensation that the dragon had not experienced since the age when dragons were common, and men were brave enough or foolish enough to approach them. Robb held his hand against the scale, and felt something, not magic, or not the kind of magic that the maesters studied, the arcane forces that powered Valyrian steel and wildfire and the glass candles. Something simpler, something that was closer to the warging, the Stark gift. The connection between a man and a wolf that ran through blood and instinct, and the shared language of creatures that existed in the same world. The dragon was not a wolf, but the connection was similar, the bridge between two minds, the channel that opened when two creatures decided to trust each other. Robb was a warg, not a trained warg, not like Bran, who would, in other timelines, become the most powerful warg in the world. But the blood was there. The Stark blood, the first men's gift, the ability to connect with animals that was the oldest magic in the north. The dragon felt it. The dragon's eyes changed. The gold shifted, deepened, the light behind it intensifying, the intelligence recognizing the connection. The dragon was old. The dragon had encountered humans before, Targaryens perhaps, in the ages before the Doom, the dragon lords who had claimed and chained and commanded. The Targaryens had used blood magic. The Targaryens had used authority. This was different. This was not authority. It was recognition. The small creature was reaching out with a part of itself that was not physical, that was not commanding, that was simply present. The reaching was an offer, not a demand. The connection was a bridge, not a chain. The dragon closed its eyes and pushed back. Robb felt it, the answering pressure, the dragon's consciousness touching his through the channel that the touch had opened. The sensation was overwhelming, vast, ancient, the weight of a mind that had existed for 1,000 years pressing against a mind that had existed for 17. The pressing was not hostile. It was curious. The dragon was curious about the small creature that had sat in its territory for 5 weeks, and that was now touching it with a hand and a mind and a connection that the dragon had not felt since the world was younger. The bonding was not instant. It was not the Targaryen claiming, the moment of conquest. It was the beginning of a conversation. Two minds touching, assessing, deciding whether the other was worth the risk of opening further. In the 6th week, Robb climbed onto the dragon's back, not because the dragon invited him, not because the bond was complete. Because the dragon was injured, the old wound on its left flank was infected, the ancient scar reopened by the cold, the flesh beneath the scales swollen and hot. Robb climbed onto the dragon's back to reach the wound, to clean it, to apply the medicines that the rangers carried, the northern remedies, the herbal pastes that healed men, and that might, Robb hoped, heal something larger. The dragon allowed the climbing. The dragon allowed the touching of the wound. The dragon allowed the cleaning and the medicine and the small creature's care. And the allowing was the moment, not the dramatic moment of a dragon lord mounting his steed, but the quiet moment of a creature permitting the thing that vulnerability required: trust. Robb treated the wound. He sat on the dragon's back while the medicine dried, and the dragon breathed the slow bellows breath, and the gold eyes were closed, and the frost fangs rose around them in the afternoon light. And the moment was not the claiming, but the beginning of something that had no name in any language, because no language had a word for what a wolf boy and a 1,000-year-old dragon built in a caldera in the frozen north. The first flight. What the sky looked like. The first flight happened 3 days before they left the caldera. Robb did not plan it. Planning was not how the dragon worked. The dragon did not respond to plans or schedules or the human habit of organizing experience into neat sequential boxes. The dragon responded to feeling, to the bond, to the current that ran between the wolf boy and the ancient creature, and that communicated in impressions rather than words. The impression was, "Come up." Not a command, an invitation. The dragon's wings extending, slowly, the massive membranes unfolding like sails, the 100-foot wingspan filling the caldera's width, the body shifting, the weight redistributing, the preparation for flight that was visible in every muscle and every scale. Robb climbed onto the dragon's back. He had done this before, for the wound treating, for the sessions of sitting on the warm scales while the bond strengthened. But this was different. The body beneath him was not resting. It was coiling, the muscles tensing with the force that was about to be applied. "Wait!" Robb began. The dragon launched. The launch was violence. The upward explosion of a body that weighed more than 100 horses, the wings slamming downward with a force that compressed the air beneath them into a wave of pressure, the ground dropping away with a speed that Robb's stomach could not process. The stomach stayed on the ground. The body went up. The mind went somewhere between the two, the place where terror and exhilaration overlapped, the place where the human brain discovered that it had never been designed for the sky and was improvising madly. Robb grabbed the shoulder ridges. He held with the grip of a man who was falling upward and who had nothing between himself and the ground except the scales beneath him and the trust that the creature carrying him did not intend to drop him. The caldera fell away. The frost fangs opened below, the jagged peaks, the snowfields, the world that Robb had been walking through for weeks, reduced to a landscape, a map, a painting. The scale was wrong. The scale was too large. The human eyes were not built for this perspective, and the perspective broke something in the way Robb saw the world, not physically, but conceptually. The realization that the ground he had spent his life walking on was, from above, insignificant. The dragon leveled. The flight became not smooth, because dragon flight was never smooth, but sustainable. The wings beating with the slow, powerful rhythm that moved the massive body through the air at a speed that Robb could not estimate because he had no reference point. There was nothing in his experience that moved this fast, nothing in the world of horses and ships and walking that compared to the speed of a dragon in open air. The cold hit him. At altitude, the northern air was not cold but violent, a cutting, stripping, bone-deep cold that took Robb's breath and his warmth and his capacity for clear thought, and replaced them with the single consuming sensation of being a small warm thing in a vast cold space. The dragon was warm. The dragon's body radiated heat, the internal furnace, the volcanic fire that lived inside the creature, the heat that was the dragon's defense against the cold that should have killed any reptilian creature centuries ago. Robb pressed against the scales. The warmth seeped through his clothing, into his skin, the heat sustaining him the way a fire sustained a man in a blizzard. He looked down. The north was below him. Not the north of maps and reports and the political geography that lords discussed at council tables. The actual north, the physical country, mountains and forests and rivers, and the vast white emptiness that stretched from the frost fangs to the shivering sea, the land that was his family's and his people's and that he was seeing, for the first time, the way the gods saw it. The seeing changed him. Not in the dramatic way, not the instant transformation of a boy into a king, in the subtle way, the way that perspective changes a person without the person's awareness, the slow shift in how the world is perceived that comes from seeing it from a height that no human was designed to occupy. From up here, the wall was a scratch on the earth. The castles were pebbles. The rivers were threads. The concerns that filled his days, the politics, the logistics, the daily management of a lordship, were invisible, too small to see, too small to matter from a height where the entire north was a landscape, and the landscape was beautiful, and the beauty was the thing that the ground could not provide. The seduction started here, the seduction of the sky, the pulling away that would, in the months to come, make the ground's concerns feel small, and the sky's perspective feel true. The dragon's gift and the dragon's curse, the view from above that made everything below seem less important than it was. Robb did not know this yet. He knew only the flying, the cold and the warmth, and the impossible speed and the perspective that made the world new. The dragon flew for an hour. Then it descended, back to the caldera, the spiraling drop that was as terrifying as the launch, the ground returning with the violence of a world that wanted its residents back. They landed. Robb dismounted. His legs did not work. His hands were shaking. His face was burned by the cold, the exposed skin raw and reddened, the windburn that would take days to heal. He was grinning. The grin was involuntary. The grin of a boy who had just done the most extraordinary thing a human being could do, and who could not, despite the terror and the cold and the shaking legs, stop grinning. "Again," Robb said. The dragon's gold eyes held something that might have been amusement. The ancient creature regarding the small grinning boy with the patience of a being that had been flying for 1,000 years and that found the boy's excitement charming. "Again," Robb said. The dragon closed its eyes. Rest first, then again. They went home 2 weeks later. Robb and 10 rangers and a direwolf and a dragon that flew above them, too high for the world to see, the dark shape against the northern sky that nobody was looking for because nobody believed it was possible. They went home. The dragon came with them. The secret. What Robb hid. Hiding a dragon was, Robb discovered, the most logistically absurd task he had ever attempted. The dragon settled in the Wolfswood, the vast forest north of Winterfell, the ancient woodland that was dense enough to hide a creature the size of a large ship if the creature was willing to be hidden. The dragon was willing. After 1,000 years of surviving by staying invisible, the dragon understood concealment the way other creatures understood breathing. Instinctively, without instruction. But concealment had limits. The dragon ate. It ate enormously. Deer, elk, the occasional aurochs, anything it could catch in the Wolfswood's depths. The eating left evidence. Stripped carcasses, scorched clearings where the dragon had cooked its kills, the disruption of the forest's ecosystem that the huntsmen noticed even when they could not explain it. Robb managed the evidence. He redirected the huntsmen's routes. He attributed the carcasses to a pack of unusually large wolves. He placed the 10 rangers, who had seen the dragon and who were sworn to secrecy, around the Wolfswood's perimeter as an informal guard, the men who kept curious visitors away from the areas where the dragon nested. "You're hiding a dragon," Jon said, 3 weeks after Robb's return. They were in the Godswood. Not the Solar, not the Hall, the Godswood, where the old gods listened and the walls did not. "I'm not." "You're hiding a dragon." Jon's voice was flat. Not accusatory, diagnostic, the tone of a man who had assembled the evidence and who had reached a conclusion that was insane and therefore must be correct, because the sane explanations had all been eliminated. "You went beyond the wall for 6 weeks. You came back with 10 men who won't talk about what they saw. You've been disappearing into the Wolfswood for 3 hours every morning. The huntsmen are reporting killed animals that look like they were cooked by fire before they were eaten. And Grey Wind," Jon looked at the direwolf, who was lying at Robb's feet with the amber eyes watching the Godswood's entrance. "Grey Wind is afraid of something. Grey Wind is not afraid of anything, except whatever is in the Wolfswood. Jon, tell me I'm wrong." Robb looked at his brother. He had not planned to tell anyone. The secret was the shield. The anonymity that protected the dragon and protected Robb, and protected the family from the political consequences of a Stark controlling the most destructive force in the world. But Jon was Jon, and lying to Jon was a thing Robb could not do, because the lying would break the brotherhood that was the most important relationship in Robb's life, and the breaking was a cost he would not pay. "You're not wrong," Robb said. Jon was quiet for a very long time. "A dragon," Jon said. "A dragon, beyond the wall, in a caldera in the Frostfangs. Volcanic, warm, it's been living there for, I don't know, centuries, longer, maybe, and I bonded with it. Not the Targaryen way, I don't have Targaryen blood, I think it's the warging, the Stark blood. The connection to animals. The dragon felt it. The dragon chose me, chose you. I sat in its territory for 6 weeks. I brought it food. I treated its wounds. I didn't try to chain it or command it. I just sat, and eventually it let me touch it, and eventually I climbed on its back. You climbed on a dragon's back to treat a wound. You climbed on a dragon's back to treat a wound. It sounds insane. It sounds insane, Robb, I know." Jon looked at the godsword, at the heart tree, at the face that had watched 8,000 years of Starks, and that was now, presumably, watching the first Stark dragonrider in the history of the world discuss his dragon in the place where the old gods lived. "Show me," Jon said. Robb took him to the wolfswood, to the clearing where the dragon nested, a depression in the forest floor, surrounded by ancient oaks that the dragon had not burned, because the dragon understood that burning its shelter would make its shelter useless. The dragon was there. Jon saw it and stopped. The stopping was involuntary, the body's response to the presence of something so large and so impossible that the mind's first reaction was refusal. Jon stopped and stared, and his hand went to his sword, and his sword was meaningless, and the meaningless was the first thing his mind processed, that the weapon on his hip was. In the presence of this creature, "A toothpick, Jon," Robb said. "Don't draw." "I wasn't. Your hand is on your sword." Jon removed his hand from his sword. The dragon watched them both. The gold eyes, the ancient, intelligent, burning eyes, tracked Jon's presence with the attention of a predator assessing a new variable. Jon was not Robb. Jon had not sat in the caldera for 6 weeks. Jon was a stranger. Grey Wind was not there. Ghost was not there. The wolves would not approach the dragon, and the dragon would not tolerate the wolves, and the mutual non-tolerance was one of the ongoing complications of hiding a dragon in a forest that a direwolf considered its territory. Jon searched for words. Jon, who was articulate and sharp and quick with language, searched for words and could not find them, because words had been invented for things that the world contained, and this was a thing the world had forgotten. It's real. It's real. How big? 60 feet from nose to tail. Wingspan of 80. It's growing. It was smaller when I found it. The eating is helping. Growing, growing. Jon looked at the dragon. The dragon looked at Jon. The mutual assessment lasted 30 seconds. The dragon's ancient intelligence evaluating the wolf brother of the wolf boy. The creature deciding whether this new human was threat or family. The dragon's eyes shifted, from alert to neutral. The assessment was complete. Not threat, not family. "Tolerable, it's letting me stay," Jon said. "It's tolerating you. There's a difference. I've been tolerated my whole life. I'm used to it. Jon, this is different from Lady Stark's tolerating." "Is it?" Both could kill me with a look. Robb almost laughed. Almost. Because the moment was too full for laughter, too heavy with the weight of what he was sharing, and what the sharing would cost. Ned learned about the dragon 2 months after Jon. He learned not because Robb told him, but because Ned was Ned, the lord who walked his own land, who knew his own forests, who noticed when the wolfswood's ecology changed. Ned noticed the killed animals. He noticed the scorch marks. He noticed that Robb disappeared for 3 hours every morning and returned with the smell of smoke on his clothing and a look on his face that was not the look of a boy who had been riding. Ned went to the wolfswood. alone, without telling Robb. He found the clearing. He found the dragon. What followed was the only time in Robb's life that he saw his father afraid. Not the fear of a man facing danger. Ned Stark had faced danger his entire life. The fear of a man facing the impossible, the thing that should not exist. The creature that the world had declared extinct a century ago, lying in the woods a mile from the castle where his children slept. Ned did not run. Ned did not draw his sword. Ned stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at the dragon, and the dragon looked at Ned, and the assessment lasted 30 seconds. The dragon's gold eyes evaluating the older wolf, the father of the wolf boy, the lord whose territory the dragon was occupying. The dragon's assessment was tolerable. Ned's assessment was impossible. "Robb," Ned said, that evening, in the solar. The door closed, the fire burning. The Lord of Winterfell and his heir, the conversation that was not a conversation, but a reckoning. There is a dragon in the Wolfswood. Yes, a living dragon. Yes, you brought it here. It followed me from beyond the wall. I found it in the Frostfangs, and I know you found it. The Rangers told me, not about the dragon, about the ruins you investigated. The scorch marks, the melted villages. Ned's face was the Stark face at its most controlled. The wall between the man and the world, the composure that was being maintained through pure will. How long? 3 months. Since I came back. 3 months you've been hiding a dragon, a mile from Winterfell, a mile from your brothers and sisters. It's not dangerous, not to us. The bond, Ned's voice. The edge, you have a bond with a dragon. The warging, the Stark blood, the connection to animals, wolves, the connection to wolves. Not dragons. Wolves are northern, wolves are Stark. Dragons are, Ned stopped. Dragons are the thing that built the Iron Throne, and the thing that nearly destroyed the realm, and the thing that every lord in the 7 kingdoms would use as justification for marching on Winterfell if they knew we had one. They won't know. They will know. You cannot hide a 60-foot predator indefinitely. The dragon flies. The dragon hunts. The dragon leaves evidence. Eventually, a traveler will see it. A bannerman's patrol will find the clearing. A raven from the watch will mention the creature that flew south from the Frostfangs. The secret will break, Robb. Every secret breaks. Then, we prepare for when it breaks. How do you prepare for the world learning that the Starks have a dragon? By being the kind of house that the world trusts with a dragon. Ned held this. The anger. And it was anger. The cold Stark anger that lived behind the composure, pressing against the assessment that was running alongside it. His son had done something extraordinary. His son had also done something dangerous. The extraordinary and the dangerous were the same thing, and the sameness was the problem. Your mother cannot know, Ned said. I agree. Not yet. Not until. I need to think about this. I need to plan. The political implications are enormous. Beyond enormous. A Stark with a dragon changes the balance of power in the 7 kingdoms. Robert will see it as a threat. The Lannisters will see it as a weapon. Stannis will see it as an abomination. Every house that has spent 300 years living under the Targaryen shadow will see it as the shadow returning. The dragon isn't Targaryen. The world won't care. A dragon is a dragon. The name on the rider is irrelevant to the fire. Robb held his father's assessment. I didn't plan this, Robb said. I went north to investigate the reports. I found something I didn't expect. And the something chose me. And the choosing was not my decision. It was the dragon's. The choosing being the dragon's decision does not reduce the consequences of the choosing being made. I know. Then we manage the consequences. Together, you and me. And John? John knows? John knows. Of course John knows. Ned almost smiled. The almost. The fraction of warmth that broke through the Stark composure. Then, we manage it. The 3 of us. Nobody else. Not until the managing produces a plan. Thank you, Father. Don't thank me. This is the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to this family, And this family once fought a war against a dynasty of dragon lords. Nobody can know, Robb said. I know. Nobody. Not father. Not mother. Not Theon. Not Maester Luwin. If the world learns that a Stark has a dragon, the world will respond. The Lannisters will see a threat. The Targaryens, wherever they are, will see a rival. The Night's Watch will see a violation. Everyone will see a power that needs to be destroyed or controlled, and I am not ready for either. When will you be ready? When I have to be. When the need is greater than the risk. Jon held the secret, the way Jon held everything Robb gave him. Silently, completely, with the loyalty of a brother who would carry a dragon's secret to his grave if the carrying was what his brother needed. Thank you, Jon said. For telling you? For not lying. You could have lied. I would have. I would have believed the large wolf explanation. For a while. I know. That's why I told you the truth, because you would have believed the lie. And believing the lie would have cost us the trust. And the trust is worth more than the secret. That's the most Stark thing you've ever said. I am a Stark. You're a Stark who rides a dragon, which is the least Stark thing anyone has ever done. There's always a first. They stood in the Wolf's Wood, the two brothers and the dragon, the secret that would eventually change the world. But not yet. Not yet. The war. When the secret broke. Ned went south. The ravens came. The world broke in the same way it always broke. Ned arrested the Lannisters, the boy king, the treason charge that every northerner knew was a lie. Robb called the banners. 20,000 men assembled at Winterfell, and Robb stood before them with Grey Wind at his side and a dragon in the Wolf's Wood that nobody knew about. And the decision he faced was the decision that would define everything. When to reveal the dragon. Now, Jon said, in the Solar, the night before the march. You have a weapon that ends the war before it starts. Use it. If I use it now, the war doesn't end. The war transforms. Tywin doesn't fight a conventional war against a dragonrider. Tywin fights an unconventional one. Assassination, poison, political isolation, the scorpion bolts that the Dornish used against Meraxes. The dragon becomes the target, not the weapon. Better they target the dragon than target our army. The army is replaceable. The dragon is not. Robb looked at the map. I save the dragon for the moment when the dragon changes everything. Not the first battle, the decisive battle. The moment when the Lannisters are committed, overextended, and unable to adjust. You're keeping a dragon in reserve. I'm keeping the most powerful weapon in the world for the moment when it matters most. And until that moment, we fight like Starks, with swords and strategy and the Northern army that has held the North for 8,000 years without dragons. Jon held the disagreement. The disagreement was visible, the set of Jon's jaw, the tightening that said, I think you're wrong, and I'm telling you by not saying it. Trust me, Robb said. I trust you. I disagree with you. Trust and disagreement are compatible. In the Stark family, they're practically synonymous. They marched south. The army moved down the King's Road. The dragon stayed in the Wolf's Wood, not because Robb commanded it. The dragon did not take commands, but because the dragon understood, through the bond, through the channel that the warging connection provided, that the time was not yet. The dragon was patient. 1,000 years of patience. A few more months would not matter. Robb fought the war without the dragon. He fought the Whispering Wood. He captured Jaime Lannister. He was crowned king in the north, in the Great Hall of Riverrun, the Greatjon's sword, and the Greatjon's bellow, and the ancient title rising from the throats of 20,000 men. Then Ned died. The raven came. The execution. The head on the spike. The thing that Robb had been fighting to prevent. and that the fighting had not prevented because the fighting was in the Riverlands, and the killing was in King's Landing, and the distance between them was the distance between a son's army and a father's neck. Robb read the Raven. He went to the river. He stood at the tumblestone, and he did not cry, and he did not scream, and he did not draw his sword. He called the dragon, not by voice. Through the bond, the channel that connected them across the hundreds of miles between River Run and the Wolfswood, the war connection that had grown stronger with the months of bonding, and that was now, in the moment of Robb's grief, the clearest and loudest and most powerful thing in his mind. The dragon came. It came from the north, flying high, invisible against the grey sky, until it descended. And the descending was the moment that the world changed. The dragon dropped through the clouds above River Run with the terrible grace of the largest predator on Earth, the wingspan blocking the light for a heartbeat, the shadow falling across the castle and the camp, and the 20,000 men who looked up and saw the thing that no living man had seen in over a century. A dragon, a living dragon, in the Riverlands, above the king in the north. The dragon landed in the field outside River Run's walls. The landing shook the ground, the weight of the creature, 60 feet of scale and muscle, and ancient fire, hitting the earth with the force of a building falling. The landing scattered horses. The landing sent men running. The landing changed history. Robb walked to the dragon, through the field, past the running men, past the panicking horses, past the lords who were standing with their mouths open and their swords half-drawn. The young wolf walking toward the largest predator in the world with the composure of a man who had been doing this for months. He put his hand on the dragon's neck. The warm scale, the gold eyes watching him, the bond humming between them, grief and fury, and the need that Robb was radiating through the connection. I need you, now. The time is now. The dragon breathed, not fire, air, a breath, the bellows pulse, the exhalation that sent heat across the field, and that said, in the dragon's language, I am here. I heard you. I came. Robb stood with his hand on the dragon's neck and looked at the northern army, the 20,000 men, the lords, the bannermen, the kingdom he had built through swords and strategy and the daily work of war, and he saw on every face the same expression. Fear. Not the fear of the enemy, the fear of the power. The fear of the man who stood beside the dragon. The fear that replaced the loyalty and the love and the following with something older and more animal. The recognition that the person you had been following was no longer the person you thought he was. The person you had been following was a dragonrider, and dragonriders were not kings. They were conquerors. The fear was the first cost. It would not be the last. The first burning. What dragonfire did. The first time Robb used the dragon in battle was at Oxcross, and the using changed everything he knew about war. The Lannister force was 5,000 men, a supply garrison camped in the Western Hills, protecting the gold road that connected Casterly Rock to the Riverlands. In the first analysis, Robb's analysis, the northern strategy that he had been developing since the Whispering Wood, the garrison was an obstacle. 5,000 men between Robb's army and Tywin's supply lines. The conventional approach. Flank. Surprise. The same bold cavalry strike that had won the Whispering Wood. The dragon offered a different approach. Robb flew to Oxcross on the dragon's back. The flying was still new, still terrifying, still the most exhilarating and the most inhuman experience that a living person could have. The ground dropping away, the air thinning, the world becoming a map, the tiny figures of men and horses and castles shrinking to the size of the toys Bran played with in the nursery. The flying was the thing that separated Robb from every lord and every king in the 7 kingdoms. The perspective. The god's eye view that turned armies into insects and rivers into threads and the political landscape that consumed every waking hour into a patchwork of colors far below. The perspective was seductive, and the seduction was the first warning. He flew over Oxcross at dawn. The garrison was below. Tents, horses, cook fires, the organized camp of a Lannister force that was professional and disciplined and completely unprepared for an attack from above, because attacks from above had not existed for over a century. The dragon breathed. The fire was not what Robb expected. He had expected the dragons of legend, the river of flame, the wall of burning that Egon had used to melt Harrenhal, the fire that was orange and red and the color of every hearth in every castle. This dragon's fire was different, hotter, bluer at the core, white at the edges, the fire of a creature that had survived 1,000 years by burning hotter than anything natural, the fire of volcanic vents and the deep earth, the fire that was not campfire or wildfire, but something older and more fundamental. The fire hit the Lannister camp. The camp erupted. Not in the gradual way of a fire spreading through tents and supplies, in the instant way, the total way, the complete and simultaneous ignition of everything combustible within 100-yard radius. Tents, wagons, horses, men. The men burned. Robb saw them from the dragon's back, tiny figures running, their bodies alight with the blue-white fire that was too hot to survive and too fast to escape. The figures ran for seconds before they fell, and the falling was the thing that Robb would carry forever. The sight of men dying because he had directed a dragon's mouth at the place where they slept. He had killed men before, at the Whispering Wood, with a sword, face to face. The killing had been terrible and personal, and the personalness was the thing that gave the killing weight. The awareness that the man dying in front of you was a man, with a name, with a life. This was not personal. This was not face to face. This was a boy in the sky pointing fire at the earth burning, and the men on the earth dying in the burning. And the boy was too far away to see their faces, and too far away to hear their screams, and the distance was the thing that made it bearable, and the thing that made it monstrous. The garrison was destroyed in 20 minutes. Not defeated, destroyed. The distinction mattered, because defeating a force left survivors, prisoners, the human remainder that wars produced and that wars were governed by. Destroying a force left char and ash and the blackened ground that was the dragon's signature, the scorched earth that would, in the weeks and months that followed, become the image that every lord in the Seven Kingdoms associated with Robb Stark. Robb landed the dragon outside the ruins. He dismounted. He walked through the destroyed camp and saw the things that Dragonfire produced, the things the songs did not describe, the things the Targaryen histories glossed over, the reality of what happened when fire from the sky met flesh on the ground. He vomited. In the ashes of Oxcross, the king in the north, the dragonrider, the most powerful man in the Seven Kingdoms, vomited, because the power was too large for the man, and the man's body was doing the thing that bodies did when the mind could not process the enormity of what it had done. Reject. Expel. The physical manifestation of a moral horror that the mind was not yet ready to contain. Jon found him. Jon had ridden to Oxcross with the cavalry, arriving after the burning, finding the ruins and the char and the young wolf on his knees in the ash. Robb, don't. The garrison is gone. All of it. 5,000 men. 20 minutes. Robb stood. His face was grey. Not from the ash, from the realization. I killed 5,000 men in 20 minutes, Jon, without fighting. Without risk. Without honor. Without anything. I pointed a dragon at a camp, and the camp burned, and everyone in it died, and I was too high to see their faces. That's not war. That's what the Targaryens did. For 300 years. The Targaryens built a dynasty on it. The Targaryens also destroyed themselves because of it. Jon looked at the ruins. You have a choice. The Targaryens chose to normalize this. You can choose differently. How? By never doing it again. The war can be fought with swords. This, Jon gestured at the destruction. This is not fighting. This is extinction. And if you do it again, if you use the dragon to burn another camp, another army, another group of men who are sleeping in their tents, then you're not the king in the north, you're the king of ashes. Robb held his brother's words. The words were the second cost. The first cost had been the fear, the look on every lord's face when the dragon had landed at Riverrun. The second cost was the knowledge, the understanding of what the dragon's power actually meant when it was applied to human beings rather than abstractions. I won't burn another camp, Robb said. What will you do with it? I'll use it differently. Not as a weapon, as a deterrent. The world knows I have a dragon. The world knows what the dragon can do. The knowing is the weapon. The actual burning, he looked at the ashes, the actual burning stops here. Can you keep that promise? I have to. That's not the same as I will. No. It's not. Robb looked at his brother. Watch me. If I start becoming the Targaryens, if I start seeing the burning as normal, as acceptable, as the easy answer to the hard question, watch me. And stop me. How do I stop a man with a dragon? By being the man he trusts more than the dragon. Jon held this. All right, Jon said. I'll watch. They left Oxcross. The ruins smouldered behind them. The ashes cooled. The scorched earth that had been a Lannister garrison became the first entry in the ledger that the world was keeping. The ledger of what the Stark dragonrider had done, and what the Stark dragonrider was capable of. The ledger would grow. The question was whether the man would grow with it. The fear. What the world saw. The world's response was uniform. Terror. The Lannisters, Tywin specifically, received the report of Oxcross with the cold calculation that Tywin brought to every disaster. 5,000 men, destroyed in 20 minutes by a creature that had not existed for over a century and that was now in the possession of a northern boy who was already the best battlefield commander in the Seven Kingdoms. The boy has a dragon, Tywin said to his war council at Harrenhal. The sentence was delivered with the flat precision of a man describing a fact rather than a catastrophe. Because Tywin Lannister did not acknowledge catastrophes, he managed them. We can build scorpion bolts, a captain offered. The Dornish used them against Meraxes. Meraxes was shot through the eye at close range by a bolt fired from a fortress. The Stark dragon was flying at altitude over an open field. Scorpion bolts are ineffective against a target you cannot aim at. Then we do not fight the dragon, we fight the man. Tywin looked at the map. The dragon is an instrument. The man who controls the instrument is the vulnerability. Kill the man, and the dragon is wild. A wild dragon is a problem for everyone. A controlled dragon is a problem for us. The Lannister strategy shifted. From military confrontation to political isolation and targeted assassination. Tywin did not announce this. Tywin did not announce strategies. He implemented them. But the ravens went out. To the Tyrells, offering alliance. To Stannis Baratheon, offering a common enemy. To every lord who feared the dragon more than they feared the Lannisters. Across the narrow sea, in Meereen, Daenerys Targaryen received the reports. A dragon. In Westeros. Not one of hers, she could feel it, through the bond with Drogon and Rhaegal and Viserion. Her dragons were here, in Slaver's Bay, chained in the pyramid, all except Drogon, who was wild and ranging. The Westerosi dragon was something else, something that should not exist. A Stark, Barristan Selmy said, reading the report from Varys' network. Robb Stark, the young wolf, king in the north. A Stark rides a dragon. Daenerys looked at her hand. Starks don't have Valyrian blood. The reports suggest the bond is different from the Targaryen bonding. Not blood magic, something older. The Starks have the warging, the first men's ability to connect with animals. The reports suggest the warging is the mechanism. A warg on a dragon. A warg on a dragon, your grace. Daenerys held this. She was the mother of dragons. She was the last Targaryen, as far as she knew. She was the woman who had walked into fire and emerged with 3 living dragons. The woman who was rebuilding the Targaryen dynasty from the ashes of Slaver's Bay. And now, there was another dragonrider. Is the dragon a threat? Daenerys said. The dragon is a fact. Facts become threats when they oppose you. Does this Stark oppose me? This Stark does not know you exist. His war is with the Lannisters. His dragon is, by all accounts, the creature is wild, ancient, not bred in dragon pits, found beyond the wall. Found beyond the wall, a dragon in the ice. The world is older than we know, your grace, and its secrets are not all in Valyria. Daenerys looked east, toward Westeros, which was her destination, her birthright, the kingdom she intended to reclaim. When I cross the narrow sea, Daenerys said, there will be another dragonrider waiting. There will be. Then we must decide whether the other dragonrider is an ally or an enemy. The decision may not be ours to make, your grace. Daenerys held this. The complexity, the political landscape that was already complicated by Lannister and Baratheon and Tyrell and the 100 competing claims, now further complicated by a Stark on a dragon in the north. Monitor him, Daenerys said. The Stark, his dragon, his intentions. When I cross, I want to know everything. Yes, your grace. The monitoring began. Another thread in the web that was being woven around Robb Stark. The Lannister threat, the Northern fear, the Southern coalition, and now the Targaryen attention. The dragonrider, who had wanted only to investigate burned villages, was now the focus of every major power in the known world. The dragon had made Robb powerful. The power had made him visible. The visibility had made him a target. The cost continued. The message was, the dragon is a greater threat than any single house. The dragon changes the rules. The dragon must be stopped. Not by one house, but by all houses acting together against the common threat. It was, Robb later reflected, the most effective political strategy Tywin had ever deployed. Because it was true. The dragon was a threat to every house. The dragon did change the rules. A single dragonrider could overthrow any dynasty, could burn any castle, could end any army. The power was too large for a single man, and the single manness was the thing that united everyone against him. The North felt it first. The Northern lords, the Umbers and the Karstarks and the Mormonts and the rest, had followed Robb to war, because Robb was a Stark and because following Starks was the Northern way. The dragon changed the equation. The lords still followed. The alternative to following was opposition, and opposition to a dragonrider was suicide. But the following was different. It was compliance, not loyalty. Obedience, not devotion. They're afraid of me, Robb said to Catelyn at River Run, after Oxcross. The mother and the son, the private conversation that Robb needed and that Catelyn provided, because Catelyn understood political isolation in the way that the Stark men understood honor, instinctively. Of course they're afraid. You have a dragon. I had Grey Wind before the dragon. Nobody was afraid of Grey Wind. Grey Wind is a wolf. Wolves are northern. Wolves are Stark. The lords understand wolves. The lords are wolves in their own ways. A dragon is not northern. A dragon is not Stark. A dragon is Targaryen. And a Stark who rides a Targaryen's weapon is a Stark who has become, in the lords' minds, something other than a Stark. I haven't changed. You've changed completely. You burned 5,000 men in 20 minutes, Robb. A boy who burns 5,000 men is not the same boy who fought with a sword at the Whispering Wood. The lords know this. The lords saw the ashes. I'm not going to use it again. Not like that. The lords don't know that. All the lords know is what they saw. The scorched earth, the char, the remains of an army that was destroyed by a power they cannot match and cannot defend against. And they are asking themselves the question that every man asks when he serves a lord who possesses absolute power. What happens when the power is turned on me? Robb held this. What do I do? He said. You govern without the dragon. You lead without the fire. You make the lords see the king, not the dragonrider. And you use the dragon only when the use is so clearly justified that no reasonable lord could argue against it. When is the use clearly justified? When the alternative is extinction. When the use saves more lives than it takes. When the burning is the only option left after every other option has been exhausted. You sound like you've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about nothing else since the dragon landed at River Run. Catelyn looked at her son. You are my son. You are Ned's son. You are the king in the north. The dragon does not change who you are, unless you let it. Don't let it. I won't. Promise me. I promise. She held the promise the way she held everything, fiercely, protectively, with the Tully grip that did not release until the thing being held was secure. The promise held. For a while. The isolation, what power cost? The isolation came in layers, and each layer was harder to remove than the last. The first layer was the lords. The northern lords, who had been Robb's companions and his supporters, and the men whose loyalty was the foundation of the kingdom of the north, retreated. Not physically, they were still present, still in the camp, still fighting. But the retreat was emotional, political, the invisible pulling back of men who no longer felt like allies, but like subjects. And the distinction between ally and subject was the distinction between a man who chose to follow and a man who followed, because refusal was death. The second layer was the camp, the soldiers, the northern men, the common swords who had marched south for Robb and who had fought and bled and died beside him. The soldiers gave Robb a wider berth. Not consciously, the widening was instinctive, the animal response to the presence of a man who controlled a predator, the way villagers gave a wider berth to the man who kept the largest dog. The widening was measured in feet, not miles, but it was real. The third layer was the family. Catelyn managed it. She managed her fear the way she managed everything, with Tully discipline, the fierce control of a mother who loved her son, and who was afraid of what her son was becoming, and who would not let the fear consume the love. She was present. She was supportive. She was afraid. Jon did not retreat. Jon was the one person whose distance to Robb remained unchanged, the brother who had promised to watch, and who watched from beside rather than from behind. Jon's consistency was the anchor, the one relationship that the dragon had not altered, the one person who looked at Robb and saw the brother rather than the dragonrider. You're the only person who still talks to me normally, Robb said to Jon one evening. In the command tent. The two brothers, and the maps, and the war that was being won by a man everyone feared. That's because I knew you before the dragon. The lords met you with the dragon. To them, you and the dragon are the same thing. To me, you're the boy I trained with in the yard, who couldn't hold a shield properly until he was 13, and who cried when Grey Wind was sick. I did not cry. You cried. I was there. Grey Wind was really sick. Oh no. And the boy who cried for a sick wolf is the same boy who rides a dragon. The lords can't see both. I can. Robb held this. I'm becoming isolated, Robb said. The dragon wins every engagement. The dragon ends every threat. And every time the dragon wins, the wall between me and the people I'm fighting for gets higher. I'm winning the war and losing the kingdom. Then stop using the dragon. I promised Oxcross was the last burning, and it was. I haven't used fire since. But the dragon is still there, flying overhead, the shadow on the ground. The lords see the shadow, and the shadow is the threat, even when the fire is not. Send it away. I can't send it away. The bond is not a leash. I don't command it. We're partners. The dragon comes because the dragon chooses to. The dragon stays because the dragon wants to. Sending it away would require, I don't know if I can. Then you need to find a way to make the dragon invisible. Not literally, politically. Make the lords see you without the dragon. Make them forget, if you can, that the dragon exists. How do you make people forget that a 60-foot predator exists? By being so good a king that the king is more interesting than the dragon. Robb looked at his brother. That's either the best advice or the worst advice I've ever received. Coming from me, it's probably both. Robb tried. He governed, he held councils, he made decisions that were fair and transparent and that demonstrated the qualities that kings needed. Judgment, patience, the ability to listen, the willingness to compromise. He governed without the dragon in every meeting, every negotiation, every interaction with the lords who were his subjects and who he needed to be his allies. It worked. Partially. The governing rebuilt some of the trust that the burning had destroyed. The lords saw the king doing the king's work, the boring, essential human work that had nothing to do with dragonfire and everything to do with the kind of leadership that the North had always valued. But the shadow was still there. The dragon flew over the camp. The dragon hunted in the surrounding forests. The dragon's presence was the constant reminder that the man who sat at the council table and listened to their grievances was also the man who could, at any moment, mount the creature and destroy them all. The isolation held. The war was being won. The kingdom was being lost. And Robb Stark, the king in the north, the dragonrider, the most powerful man in the 7 kingdoms, was the loneliest man in the world. The war's end. What dragonfire could not win? The war ended not because Robb won it, but because the winning made the war pointless. Tywin's coalition, the Lannister-Tyrell-Baratheon alignment against the dragonrider, did not fight. Tywin was too smart to fight a war he could not win, and a war against a dragonrider was a war nobody could win unless the dragonrider could be separated from the dragon, and Robb's warging bond made the separation impossible. Instead, Tywin negotiated. The negotiation was not a surrender. Tywin Lannister did not surrender. It was a settlement, a political arrangement that acknowledged the reality of the dragonrider's existence without conceding the Lannister position entirely. Northern independence was recognized. The Riverlands were ceded to the Northern Kingdom. Sansa was returned. The Iron Throne made no claim on the territories north of the Neck. In exchange, Robb agreed to a condition that Tywin inserted with the surgical precision of a man who understood that the knife you did not see was the knife that killed you. The dragon would not cross south of the Neck. The dragon stays north, Tywin said, in the negotiation. The 2 men across a table, the same table that had held 100 negotiations over the centuries, the table where the powerful decided the fate of the powerless. The dragon goes where the dragon chooses, Robb said. I don't command it. Then you choose not to ride it south. The distinction is academic. The distinction is fundamental. The dragon is wild. It is not my weapon. It is my partner. I can agree not to ride it south for purposes of war. I cannot agree to restrict the movement of a creature I do not control. then we have a problem. We have a negotiation. Problems are what negotiations produce, until they produce agreements. Tywin looked at the young lord, the dragonrider, the king in the north, the boy who had learned to negotiate from the war that the dragon had won and the isolation that the dragon had caused. "You are not what the reports suggested," Tywin said. "The reports suggested a boy who burns armies. The reports suggested a boy who enjoys it. I burned one army. I vomited afterward. I have not used dragonfire since. The reports are wrong about the enjoying. Then we can negotiate." They negotiated. The agreement was reached. Robb would not ride the dragons south of the neck for purposes of military aggression. The dragon's movement was its own business. A creature that had been wild for 1,000 years could not be contractually restricted. But the man's use of the creature was constrained, and the constraint was the thing that Tywin needed to sell the agreement to the coalition. The war ended. Not with a battle, with a document. The most powerful war in the history of the Seven Kingdoms since the conquest ended by a piece of parchment, because the alternative to the parchment was a dragonrider who had demonstrated at Oxcross what dragonfire did to armies, and who was now, by mutual agreement, constrained from doing it again. Robb rode north with his army and his dragon, and the peace that he had won, and the isolation that the peace had not healed. The kingdom was independent. The family was safe. The war was over. The loneliness remained. The North. What governing with a dragon looked like. Governing the kingdom of the North with a dragon was like governing a kingdom with a loaded crossbow pointed at every council table, effective, efficient, and fundamentally destructive of the trust that governance required. Robb discovered this in the first year of peace. The lords came to Winterfell for the councils that the new kingdom required, the establishment of laws, the organization of defense, the building of the institutions that would make the Kingdom of the North a functioning state rather than a military alliance. The lords came because the king summoned them, and because the alternative to coming was the dragon. They did not say this. Northern lords did not say the things they were thinking, because Northern lords expressed themselves through action rather than speech. But Robb saw it in the eyes, in the posture, in the small withdrawals that accumulated over months into a pattern of compliance that was the opposite of consent. "They obey because they're afraid," Robb said to Jon. In the Solar, the same conversation, repeated monthly, the ongoing dialogue between the king and the brother about the dragon's cost. "Some of them, not all." "Name the ones who aren't afraid." "Mormont. Mormont isn't afraid of anything. Lady Mormont is afraid of the dragon. She told me so. To my face. Because Mormont tells you things to your face." "What did she say?" "She said, 'Your Grace, I followed your father because I chose to. I follow you because I must.' The distinction eats at me." Robb looked at the Solar's window, the view of Winterfell's yard where the training happened, and the horses moved and the daily life of a castle continued regardless of the dragon in the Wolfswood. She followed father because she chose to. She follows me because she must. That's the distinction that the dragon created. Choice to compulsion. Loyalty to obedience. Then give them the choice back. How? The dragon exists. Its existence is the constraint. I can't unexist the dragon. You can unuse the dragon. I haven't used it since Oxcross, months ago. But you could use it. That's the point. The power's existence is the threat, even when the power isn't exercised. A lord who has a dragon could burn your castle. The could is the threat. The could is the thing that turns choice into compulsion. So the only way to restore the choice is to remove the could. To remove the could. To what? Kill the dragon? Send it away? Break the bond? I don't know. I'm telling you the problem. The solution is yours. Robb held this, the problem that had no good solution. The dragon's existence created the fear created the compulsion created the isolation, and the only way to end the isolation was to end the dragon's presence. And ending the dragon's presence was the thing Robb did not know how to do, because the bond was not a leash that could be untied. The bond was a relationship. And relationships were not ended by decision. They were ended by change. The change was coming. Robb did not know it yet. But the dragon knew. The threat. What came from the north? The White Walkers came in the second winter of northern independence. The reports were familiar. Disappearing rangers, villages emptied, the cold that was too cold for normal winter, the cold that carried death in its frost. The reports came from the wall, from the Night's Watch, from the men who had been watching the far north for 8,000 years, and who were now seeing the thing that 8,000 years of watching had been preparing for. The dead were rising. The others were marching. The long night that the children's stories promised was arriving, and the arriving was not a metaphor or a legend, but an army of ice and frozen corpses heading south toward the wall that had been built to hold them. Robb received the reports at Winterfell. He sat in the solar with Jon and Catelyn and the War Council, and he read the reports, and he felt the thing that every leader felt when the threat was existential. The shrinking of every other problem to the size of its actual importance. The political isolation, the Lord's fear, the dragon's cost, all of it shrank beside the threat from the north, because the threat from the north was the threat that ended everything. The wall will not hold, Jon said. Not prediction, assessment. Jon had been corresponding with the Watch for months, had heard the reports, had spoken with Benjen. The Watch is undermanned, 800 men on a wall that was built for 10,000. The dead don't need to breach the wall, they need to outlast the men defending it. How long? Months, maybe less. Then we marched north. With what? 20,000 men against an army of the dead. Northern steel against creatures that the legends say cannot be killed by steel. The legends say they can be killed by fire. The room went quiet. The fire. The dragon's fire. The weapon that Robb had promised not to use again. The power that had destroyed Oxcross and terrified the Seven Kingdoms and isolated Robb from the people he governed. The fire that was now, potentially, the only thing that could stop the end of the world. "You're going to use the dragon," Catelyn said. Not a question. If the wall falls, nothing else matters. Not the isolation, not the fear, not the political cost. If the dead come south, the dragon is the only thing that stops them. And after the dead are stopped, the dragon will have been used again. The lords will have seen the burning again. The fear will be justified, because the burning will have saved their lives. Robb looked at his mother. This is the moment you told me to wait for, the moment when the use is clearly justified, when the alternative is extinction, when the burning saves more lives than it takes. Catelyn held this. "I know," she said. "I know this is the moment. I hoped the moment wouldn't come." "I know. Mother, go. Save the wall. Save the north. And come home. I'll come home with the dragon. With whatever the dragon decides." Robb marched north with 20,000 men and a dragon. The march was different from the march south. The march south had been a war against men, a human conflict with human stakes and human rules. The march north was a war against the impossible, the existential threat that the wall had been built to contain, and that the wall was failing to contain. The dragon flew overhead. The shadow on the snow. The dark shape against the grey sky, larger now than it had been. The dragon had grown in the months since the finding. The eating and the freedom producing a creature that was no longer 60 feet, but closer to 80. The wingspan stretching to 100 feet. The ancient predator resuming the size that 1,000 years of starvation had diminished. The army reached the wall. The wall was. There was no preparation for the wall. Even for Robb, who had been beyond the wall, who had climbed the Frostfangs, who had seen the dragon's caldera. The wall was 700 feet of ice, stretching from horizon to horizon, the single largest structure in the world, and it was failing. The cold was visible, not felt, visible. The ice was sweating, the surface slick with the melt that the supernatural cold produced. The wall's magic fighting the other's magic. Ice against ice. The two forces grinding against each other with the slow pressure of glaciers. Beyond the wall, the dead were gathering. Robb could see them from the wall's top, the army of the dead, spreading across the frozen landscape like a stain. The thousands and thousands of corpses animated by the other's magic, the blue-eyed dead marching south with the patience of creatures that did not tire and did not fear and did not stop. Gods, Jon said, beside him, on the wall. There are no gods here, Robb said. Just ice and fire. Then we use the fire. Robb looked at the dragon, circling above the wall, the dark shape against the grey sky, the gold eyes visible even at altitude, the creature that had been hidden in the north for 1,000 years, and that was now, at the moment of the north's greatest threat, the north's only defense. He climbed onto the dragon's back. The climbing was familiar now, the scaling of the great dark flank, the grip on the shoulder ridges, the settling into the space between the wings that had become, over months of flying, the most natural seat in the world. He settled. The dragon felt him. The bond hummed. Fly, Robb said. The dragon flew. The burning of the dead. What fire did to ice. The burning was the thing that justified everything. Not the ox-cross burning, not the killing of sleeping men, the destruction of a human army. This was different. This was fire applied to death itself, the dragon's ancient heat directed against the ancient cold, the weapon that had been the source of Robb's isolation now deployed against the enemy that made the isolation irrelevant. The dragon flew low over the army of the dead. The dead did not react the way men reacted. Men ran. Men screamed. Men sought cover and tried to survive the unsurvivable. The dead did not run. The dead continued marching, the blue eyes unchanged, the frozen bodies moving south with the mechanical persistence of things that did not understand fear, because fear required the capacity for loss, and the dead had already lost everything. The dragon breathed. The blue-white fire, the volcanic fire, the fire that was hotter than anything natural, hit the army of the dead, and the army of the dead burned. Not gradually, not with the spreading ignition of living things catching fire. Instantly. The dead were combustible in a way that the living were not. The frozen bodies, the ice magic that animated them, the unnatural cold that was their substance. All of it was fuel for the dragon's heat. The fire hit the dead, and the dead burned, and the burning was total, and the totality was the justification. This was what the fire was for. Not for armies of sleeping men, not for garrisons and camps and the human settlements that wars produced. The fire was for this, the ancient threat, the enemy that steel could not kill, the dead that only fire could return to death. Robb flew over the army of the dead, and the dragon breathed, and the dead burned, and the burning was not horror, the burning was salvation. The salvation was not personal. Robb was not saved by the burning. The north was saved. The wall was saved. The world that lived south of the wall was saved by a wolf on a dragon in the northern sky. The fire falling like rain. The dead returning to the death they had been stolen from. The others retreated. The ice creatures that commanded the dead, the white walkers, the pale things with the blue eyes and the ice weapons. The others could not be burned. The dragon's fire touched them, and the fire changed, turned to steam, to mist, the heat meeting the supernatural cold and the two forces cancelling each other. The others could not be burned, but the others could be driven back, because the army they commanded was burning, and an army that was burning was an army that was losing, and the others retreated north, into the ice, into the frozen wasteland beyond the Frostfangs, into the place where even a dragon's fire could not follow. The battle was won, not the war. The others were not destroyed, not eliminated, not permanently defeated. The others retreated. The dead were burned. The wall was saved. The immediate threat was neutralized, and the neutralizing was the victory that would hold for years, perhaps decades, until the others gathered strength and tried again. But the immediate was what mattered. The immediate was the living. The immediate was the 20,000 men on the wall who were not overrun, and the millions south of the wall who did not die, and the kingdom that continued to exist because a dragon had flown and a dragon had burned, and the burning had been, for the first and only time in the dragon's partnership with Robb Stark, entirely and unambiguously right. Robb landed the dragon on the wall. He dismounted. He stood on the ice, 700 feet above the world, the wind pulling at his cloak, the dragon beside him, the vast dark shape steaming in the cold air, the heat of the creature melting the wall's surface into a puddle that refroze as Robb watched. He looked north. The dead were gone. The others were retreating. The threat was contained, not ended, contained. The distinction mattered because the distinction was the truth. The others would come again. The Long Night was not defeated in a single battle. The Long Night was managed, held, contained by the wall and the watch and the weapons that the living brought to the fight. The dragon was one weapon, not the only weapon, not the final weapon. One weapon in a war that would last longer than any single man or any single dragon. Robb stood on the wall and looked at the dragon and felt the thing he had been carrying since the caldera, the weight of the bond, the connection between the wolf boy and the ancient creature, the relationship that had given him power and cost him everything the power could not buy. The dragon looked back at him. The gold eyes. Ancient. Intelligent. The eyes that had assessed him in a caldera in the Frostfangs, and that had watched him grow from a boy who sat in its territory to a man who rode its back. The eyes that were, now, looking at him with something that was not the assessment of a predator or the tolerance of a partner, but something else. Something that looked like farewell. The leaving. What the dragon chose. The dragon left on a morning in late winter. Not suddenly, gradually. The way wild things left. The slow withdrawal that was not a departure, but a dissolution. The presence becoming absence in increments so small that the change was visible only in retrospect. The dragon stopped coming to the Wolfswood every day. First, it was every other day. Then, twice a week. Then once. Then the dragon was gone for a week, and Robb felt the bond stretching, not breaking. Stretching, the connection thinning like a thread pulled across a distance that was growing. The dragon was hunting farther north. Beyond the Wolfswood. Beyond the gift. Beyond the wall. Into the country where it had lived for 1,000 years. The territory that was its home in a way that Winterfell was Robb's home. The place where the creature had been itself, fully, without the constraints that human territory imposed. Robb felt the leaving through the bond. He felt the dragon's restlessness, the ancient creature's dissatisfaction with the smallness of the Wolfswood, the enclosure of a forest that was vast by human standards, but that was, for a creature whose territory had been the entire frozen north, a cage, a comfortable cage, a loving cage, but a cage. He felt the dragon's need, not for freedom, because the dragon had always been free, for solitude, for the silence of the ice, for the volcanic caldera where the heat came from the earth, and the sky was empty, and the only living thing in 100 miles was the dragon itself. He felt the dragon choosing. The choosing was not a decision, it was a direction. The dragon's will turning north, toward the ice, toward the wild, toward the place where dragons had existed before men had built walls and castles and kingdoms. The turning was gentle. The turning was respectful. The turning was the dragon's way of saying, I chose you. I stayed. I fought. I am going now. Robb went to the Wolf's Wood on the morning he felt the bond shift. He found the dragon in the clearing, the nesting place, the depression where the creature had slept for months, the ground scorched by the body's heat, the surrounding trees bearing the marks of the dragon's presence. The dragon was awake, standing, the wings half extended, the posture of a creature preparing for flight. Robb walked to the dragon. He put his hand on the neck, the warm scale, the texture he had known since the caldera, the feel of the dragon's body under his palm that had become as familiar as Greywind's fur. The gold eyes looked at him. You're leaving, Robb said. The dragon did not speak. Dragons did not speak. But the bond carried the answer, the impression, the feeling, the communication that was not words, but that was, in its way, more honest than words. The answer was yes, I am leaving. The time is finished. The threat is contained. The burning is done. I am going home. I know, Robb said. He did not try to stop the dragon. This was the thing that mattered, the thing that separated Robb from every Targaryen dragonlord in history, the thing that made the bonding what it was. The Targaryens had chained their dragons. The Targaryens had commanded, controlled, confined. The Targaryens had treated their dragons as possessions, the most magnificent possessions in the world, but possessions nonetheless. Robb did not possess the dragon. Robb had never possessed the dragon. The dragon had chosen him, and the choosing had been a gift, and the gift was being taken back. And the taking back was the dragon's right, because the gift had always been the dragon's to give, and the dragon's to reclaim. Thank you, Robb said. To the dragon. The word was absurd, thanking a 1,000-year-old predator for the partnership that had won a war and saved the North and cost Robb every political relationship he had. But the absurdity was honest, and honest was the thing Robb could be. The dragon closed its eyes. The closing was the answer, the acceptance of the gratitude, the recognition of the shared experience, the farewell that creatures older than language expressed through the body rather than through words. The dragon opened its wings. The wingspan was enormous, 100 feet of dark membrane and bone. The wings that had carried Robb over battlefields and over the wall and over the army of the dead. The wings that were opening now for the last time in Robb's presence. The dragon launched. Not gradually, explosively. The leap from the ground, the wings catching the air, the massive body rising with a speed that belied its size, the ancient creature ascending through the trees and into the sky with the power that only a dragon possessed. The trees shook. The ground trembled. The air displaced by the wings hit Robb in the chest and staggered him, the physical force of the departure knocking the king back a step. The dragon rose. Through the canopy, through the clouds, into the sky above Winterfell, the dark shape against the grey, the form that every northerner had learned to recognize, and that every northerner was now watching for the last time. The dragon turned north, toward the wall, toward the Frostfangs, toward the caldera where the volcanic heat rose from the earth, and the world was empty, and the dragon could be what it had always been. Wild, ancient, free. Robb stood in the clearing and watched the dragon fly north. He watched until the shape was a dot, and then until the dot was a memory, and then until the memory was the only thing left. The afterimage of something vast and dark against the northern sky, the last sight of the creature that had changed his life and won his war, and taught him the thing that no lord and no king and no dragonrider in the history of the world had ever learned, that the greatest. Power was not the fire, not the flying, not the ability to destroy armies and melt stone and terrify kingdoms into submission. The greatest power was letting go. Robb stood in the empty clearing, in the wolfswood, in the north, that was his, and that was no longer shadowed by the dragon's presence. He stood, and he felt the bond, thinning, fading, the thread stretching northward as the dragon flew, the connection that had been the center of his life for over a year, dissolving into the distance. Not breaking. Dissolving. The distinction mattered, because breaking was violent, and dissolving was gradual, and the gradualness was the dragon's final gift, the slow release that let Robb adjust, that let the man who had been a dragonrider become, again, simply a man. Grey wind came to the clearing. The direwolf, who had refused to approach the dragon, who had been displaced in Robb's life by the larger and more powerful creature, who had waited at the wolfswood's edge for months while the dragon occupied the territory that the wolf considered his. Grey wind came to the clearing and sat beside Robb and pressed his grey shoulder against Robb's leg. The wolf's warmth was different from the dragon's warmth. Smaller, closer, more familiar. The warmth of a creature that had been with Robb since the pups were found near Winterfell, the companion that predated the dragon, and that would, now, outlast it. "Just us," Robb said. Grey wind pressed harder. "Just us." Robb put his hand on the wolf's head, the grey fur, the amber eyes, the familiar weight of the creature he had grown up with, the partner that the dragon had overshadowed, and that was now, in the dragon's absence, the largest and the most important thing in the clearing. The dragon was gone. The wolf was here. And Robb Stark, the king in the north, the former dragonrider, the man who had flown and burned and fought and governed and lost and learned, was standing in a forest with his wolf, and the standing was enough. The king without the dragon, what Robb became. The dragon's departure changed the kingdom of the north. Not immediately, the change was gradual, the way all important changes were gradual in the north, the slow shift of a people who process change through observation rather than reaction. The lords noticed first. The dragon's shadow was gone. The daily flyover, the dark shape against the sky, the constant reminder of the power that the king possessed. Gone. The wolfswood was quiet. The sky was empty. The king was at Winterfell, governing, without the creature that had made governing feel like commanding and commanding feel like threatening. The noticing produced the softening. Lady Mormont came to Winterfell. She came without summons, the first time a lord had come to Winterfell, without being summoned since the dragon had arrived. She came because the absence of the summons was, in the north, as important as the summons itself. A lord who came without being told was a lord who came because she chose to. "The dragon is gone," Mormont said. "The dragon went home." "Home?" "North, beyond the wall, to the place where it was born. The bond is, it's still there. Faintly. But the dragon chose the wild, and I chose to let it go." Mormont looked at Robb. The Mormont assessment, blunt, direct, the look of a woman who had served 2 Starks and who was now deciding whether the third was worth the serving. "You let it go," she said. "I let it go. Most men would have tried to keep it. Most men don't understand that keeping a wild thing destroys the wildness that makes it worth keeping. That's..." Mormont stopped. "That's wise. For a boy your age. I've learned a lot in a short time. You've burned an army and saved the wall and lost a dragon. That's more than most lords experience in a lifetime. I'd trade the burning for the keeping. I'd have kept the wall saving. And the losing was the dragon's choice, not mine." Mormont held the assessment for a moment longer. "I followed your father because I chose to," she said. "And I told you that I follow you because I must. The dragon. She held the pause. The dragon is gone, and I'm standing here, without summons, without compulsion, because I choose to. Because you choose to. Because you let it go. Mormont held the look. A man who lets that kind of power go is a man worth choosing. Not because he's powerful, because he understands that power is not the thing that makes a king worth following. What makes a king worth following? The willingness to lead without the power, to govern without the threat, to be the king who does not need the dragon, who was always the king, even before the dragon came and after the dragon left. Robb held this. Thank you, Lady Mormont. Don't thank me. Earn it. I will. You'd better. Bear Island doesn't give second chances. She left. Other lords came. The Umbers, the Manderleys, the Glovers, the Karstarks. One by one, the northern lords who had been subjects under the dragon's shadow became allies under the empty sky. The compliance that the dragon had produced was replaced by the consent that its absence permitted, and the consent was stronger than the compliance, because consent was chosen, and chosen things held. Robb governed. He governed the way his father had governed, through presence, through honor, through the daily practice of being the lord who was among his people rather than above them. The dragon had put him above. The dragon's departure put him back. Catelyn came to the clearing. The day after the dragon left, she came because she had seen it go. From Winterfell's walls, watching the dark shape rise above the wolfswood and turn north, diminishing against the grey sky until the shape was gone, and the sky was empty, and the world was, for the first time in over a year, a world without a dragon in it. She found Robb in the clearing, sitting, grey wind beside him, the depression in the earth where the dragon had slept, the scorched ground cooling, the trees bearing the marks of the creature's presence, the broken branches, the claw marks in the bark, the evidence of something enormous that had been here and was not here anymore. Robb. He looked up. His mother's face, the Tully blue, the red hair, the beauty that had aged into strength, the face of the woman who had been afraid of the dragon and who was now standing in the dragon's abandoned nest, looking at her son. It's gone, Robb said. I saw. It went north. Back to the caldera. Back to home. Catelyn sat beside him. In the scorched earth, on the ground that smelled of fire and animal and the particular sweetness of a creature that had burned with a heat no natural thing produced. Are you all right? She said. He searched. I don't know what I am. I'm lighter. The weight of it, the dragon, the bond, the power, the fear it produced. The weight is gone. But the gone feels empty. Empty is what comes after something large leaves. Empty is the space that gets filled by what comes next. What comes next? The governing, the ruling, the being the king without the dragon, the thing you should have been doing all along. I was governing. You were governing with a shadow. The shadow is gone. The governing that remains is the governing that matters, the real kind, the kind that's done by a man, not by a man and a dragon. Robb looked at his mother. You hated the dragon, he said. I feared the dragon. Hate and fear are different. I hated what the dragon did to you, the isolation, the loneliness, the look in your eyes when you came back from flying. You came back from the sky, looking at the ground as if the ground were beneath you, not physically. Emotionally, the sky made the ground feel small, and I was on the ground, and the feeling small was the thing I hated. I never thought the ground was small. You didn't think it. You felt it. The feeling was visible. To me, to Jon, to everyone who loved you and who watched you fly and who saw you come back each time a little further from us. Robb held this. I'm sorry, he said. Don't be sorry. The dragon saved the wall. The dragon saved the north. The dragon gave you the power to win a war that should have killed us all. The sorry is not for the having. The sorry is for the cost. And the cost was real. And the cost is over. The cost is over. The dragon is gone. You're here. The kingdom needs a king. Catelyn touched his face, the mother's touch, the hand on the cheek that she had been doing since he was small and that had not changed despite the dragon and the war and the crown. Be the king. Without the dragon. Be the king I know you can be. I will. I know you will. She stood. She looked at the empty clearing. I always trusted the boy. The dragon worried me. The boy I trusted. She left. Robb sat in the clearing and held his mother's words. The boy. The dragon. The distinction that everyone had made. The lords. The soldiers. The mother. The two things that they saw when they looked at him. The boy who was Stark. The dragon that was not. The boy was still here. The dragon was gone. The boy was enough. He governed with Jon beside him, and Catelyn behind him, and grey wind at his feet, and the northern sky above, empty of dragons and full of the stars that the north had navigated by for 8,000 years. He governed without the fire. And the governing was, for the first time since the caldera, enough. What if Robb Stark became a dragonrider? He found a dragon beyond the wall, an ancient creature, 1,000 years old, scarred and vast and intelligent, hidden in a volcanic caldera in the Frostfangs. He earned its trust through 6 weeks of patience and restraint, sitting in its territory, bringing food, treating wounds, refusing to treat it as a weapon. The dragon chose him, not through blood magic or Valyrian authority, but through the Stark gift, the warging, the first men's connection to the wild things that was the oldest magic in the north. He rode the dragon to war. He burned a Lannister army at Oxcross and vomited in the ashes. He won the War of the Five Kings, not through dragonfire, but through the threat of dragonfire, the deterrent that made fighting pointless, the shadow on the ground that said, "Do not test me." He won the war and lost his kingdom, because a king who has a dragon is feared, and a king who is feared is obeyed, and a king who is obeyed is alone. He saved the wall. When the White Walkers came, the ancient threat, the army of the dead, the long night that the children's stories promised, Robb flew north on the dragon's back and burned the dead and drove the others into the ice. The burning was the justification for everything the dragon had cost. The burning was the reason the dragon existed. The burning was the one use of dragonfire that was entirely and unambiguously right. And then the dragon left. The wild creature that had chosen a wolf boy in a caldera chose the wild again. Flew north, beyond the wall, into the ice and the silence and the volcanic heat that was its home. The leaving was the dragon's choice, not Robb's, and the distinction was the point. The dragon had never been a possession. It had been a partnership, and partnerships ended when one partner outgrew the other, or when the purpose that had united them was fulfilled, or when the wild thing that had been tamed realized that it had never been tamed at all. Robb let it go. He let it go because holding a wild thing destroyed the wildness. He let it go because the king he needed to be was the king who did not need a dragon. He let it go because the fire had saved the north, and the fire had cost the north, and the fire was gone now, and the gone was the gift. The lords came back, one by one, not because they had to, because they chose to. The compliance of the dragon's shadow was replaced by the consent of the empty sky, and the consent was stronger because it was chosen, and chosen things held. Lady Mormont said it best. A man who lets that kind of power go is a man worth choosing. Robb Stark, the king in the north, the former dragonrider, the man who had flown and burned and lost and learned, and who stood in a clearing in the Wolfswood with a wolf at his side, and a kingdom at his back and an empty sky above, and the knowledge that the greatest power was not the fire, but the letting go. The dragon went north. The king went home. The sky was empty. The kingdom was full.